The British royal family is one of the oldest, most powerful, and most scrutinized monarchies in the world. For over 1,000 years, it has shaped history, survived wars, navigated political upheavals, and adapted to a constantly evolving society. From legendary kings and queens who expanded an empire to modern royals facing intense media scrutiny, their story is one of power, survival, and transformation. But how did this dynasty begin? How did a collection of warlords and feudal rulers evolve into the global institution we see today? The history of the British monarchy is filled with dramatic power struggles, betrayals, alliances, and scandals, each event leaving an unforgettable mark on the world. This journey through time will take us from the early days of Anglo-Saxon rule to the arrival of the Normans, the glory of the Tudors, and the rise of the Victorian Empire. We will witness the monarchy's near collapse during civil wars, its reinvention in the 20th century, and the challenges it faces today in an era of democracy, media scrutiny, and shifting public opinion. Through the highs and lows, one fact remains. The British royal family is not just a relic of the past. It is a living symbol of tradition, power, and resilience, still commanding attention across the globe. In this documentary, we will explore the entire history of the British royal family, uncovering the events and decisions that have defined it. Whether you admire them or question their relevance, there is no denying the immense impact they have had on Britain and the world. Let's begin. The story of the British royal family begins long before crowns, palaces, and grand coronations. It is a tale of warriors, invaders, and ancient traditions that shaped the foundation of what would one day become the United Kingdom. Before the famous monarchs of England, before the Tudors, before the Normans, there were the tribal kings of Britain, the Romans who sought to conquer them, and the Anglo-Saxons who laid the groundwork for the monarchy that still exists today. Before the Romans arrived in the 1st century AD, Britain was a land of independent tribes, each ruled by their own king or chieftain. These tribes, mostly Celtic in origin, controlled different parts of the island and often clashed over territory and resources. Some of the most famous early rulers of Britain were legendary figures, their stories passed down through oral tradition rather than written records. One of these legendary figures was King Lud, believed to have been a king of the Britons before the Roman invasion. He is said to have founded the city of London, originally called Caerlud or Lud's Fortress, though historians debate the accuracy of such claims. Another legendary figure was King Cunobelin, Cymbeline, who ruled in the late 1st century BC and early 1st century AD. He controlled much of southeastern Britain and had strong trade relations with the Roman Empire. While these early rulers exercised power over their respective regions, there was no single, unified Britain. Instead, these Celtic kings governed loosely connected territories, often warring with one another. However, this fragmented rule would soon be challenged by the might of an empire that sought to bring Britain under its control, the Romans. In 43 AD, under the orders of Emperor Claudius, the Romans launched a full-scale invasion of Britain. Led by General Aulus Plautius, the Roman legions quickly defeated many of the local tribes and established control over much of southern Britain. The arrival of the Romans marked the beginning of dramatic changes in governance, society, and culture. One of the most famous early British rulers to resist Roman rule was Boudicca, the warrior queen of the Iceni tribe. After the Romans mistreated her people and her family, she led a fierce rebellion in 60 to 61 AD, burning Roman settlements, including Londinium, modern-day London. Though her uprising was ultimately crushed, she became a legendary symbol of British resistance. For nearly 400 years, Britain was a Roman province, ruled by governors appointed by the emperor. The influence of Roman rule meant that many of the tribal kings were either removed from power or forced to become client rulers under Roman oversight. The idea of a single, centralized government began to take shape, although it was still under foreign control. However, by the early 5th century, the Roman Empire was in decline. As Rome struggled with internal conflicts and external invasions, the legions stationed in Britain were recalled to defend the empire's heartland. In 410 AD, the last Roman troops left Britain, and the island was left to govern itself once again. With the Romans gone, Britain became vulnerable to new waves of invaders, the Anglo-Saxons. In the decades following Rome's withdrawal, Britain entered a period of chaos and fragmentation. Without the protection of the Roman legions, local rulers struggled to defend their territories against new invaders from across the North Sea, the Anglo-Saxons. These were groups of warriors and settlers from what is now Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands, including the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. The Anglo-Saxons did not arrive all at once. Their migration spanned several generations. At first, they were hired as mercenaries by British rulers to help defend against raids from other groups, such as the Picts and the Scots. However, over time, they began to seize land for themselves, establishing their own kingdoms across England. One of the earliest recorded British leaders to resist the Anglo-Saxons was a figure named Ambrosius Aurelianus, a Romano-British warlord who fought to reclaim lost territory. His efforts are believed to have inspired the legend of King Arthur, the mythical warrior king who, according to later medieval tales, led the Britons against the invading Saxons. While there is no solid historical evidence proving Arthur's existence, the legend reflects the fierce battles fought during this time. By the early 7th century, the Anglo-Saxons had established several powerful kingdoms, each ruled by their own kings. These included Wessex, a kingdom in the southwest that would later produce England's greatest kings; Mercia, a dominant power in central England; Northumbria, a northern kingdom that played a key role in early English culture; East Anglia, a smaller kingdom named after the Angles; Kent, the first Anglo-Saxon kingdom to embrace Christianity. These kingdoms often fought against each other for supremacy, but over time, they developed a shared Anglo-Saxon identity that would shape the future of England. One of the most significant moments in the formation of the English monarchy came in 597 AD, when Christianity was reintroduced to Anglo-Saxon England. Pope Gregory the Great sent a missionary named Augustine to convert King Ethelbert of Kent, who became the first Anglo-Saxon king to embrace Christianity. This event not only marked the spread of the new religion, but also strengthened ties between England and the wider European world. Another key figure in the rise of the monarchy was King Alfred the Great, r. 871 to 899. Though he ruled centuries later, he is often considered the first true king of the English. He successfully defended Wessex from Viking invasions, promoted learning, and laid the foundation for a unified England. By the 10th century, the various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms gradually merged into one, leading to the formation of the Kingdom of England. The monarchy was becoming more structured, with kings beginning to rule over the entire land rather than just small territories. This transformation set the stage for the future kings and queens who would rule Britain for the next 1,000 years. The origins of the British royal family are deeply intertwined with the struggles of early Britain, from tribal kings fighting for dominance to the influence of Roman rule and the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons. Though the monarchy as we know it did not yet exist, the foundations were being laid for a powerful, centralized rule that would eventually evolve into the institution we recognize today. The next chapter will take us to one of the most defining moments in British history, the Norman Conquest of 1066, when a new dynasty would seize the throne and forever change the course of England's monarchy. By the 11th century, England had become a powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdom, ruled by kings who had united the land after centuries of war and Viking invasions. But everything was about to change. A single event in 1066 would alter the course of English history forever: the Norman Conquest. This was not just a battle for the throne. It was a complete transformation of England's monarchy, governance, and society. The man at the center of this conquest was William the Conqueror, a duke from Normandy who would reshape the very foundation of the British royal family. The crisis that led to the Norman Conquest began with the death of King Edward the Confessor in January 1066. Edward had ruled England for over 2 decades, but he left no clear heir. His reign had been marked by religious devotion, earning him the title the Confessor. But his failure to secure a smooth succession created one of the greatest power struggles in history. Upon Edward's death, the Anglo-Saxon nobles chose Harold Godwin's son, the Earl of Wessex, as the new king. He was a strong military leader and had the support of England's ruling class. However, his claim to the throne was immediately challenged by 2 powerful rivals. William, Duke of Normandy. William claimed that Edward had promised him the throne years earlier, and that Harold had sworn an oath of loyalty to support his claim. Harald Hardrada, King of Norway. He argued that the English crown belonged to him due to an old Viking agreement. With multiple contenders vying for the throne, England was on the brink of war. Harold Godwinson's first challenge came not from William, but from Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway. In September 1066, Hardrada launched an invasion with over 10,000 Viking warriors, landing in northern England. His forces were met by King Harold at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25, 1066. The battle was brutal. The Viking army, caught off guard by the speed of Harold's forces, was utterly crushed. Hardrada himself was killed, along with thousands of his men. The victory was decisive, but it came at a cost. Harold's army was exhausted and weakened. And just as he celebrated his triumph, word came that William of Normandy had landed on England's southern shores. William, Duke of Normandy, had spent months preparing for his invasion. On October 14, 1066, he met Harold's forces at the Battle of Hastings, one of the most famous battles in British history. Harold's army, though battle-hardened, was exhausted from their march from the north. They took a defensive position on Senlac Hill, using their famous shield wall to resist the Norman attacks. William's knights and archers launched repeated assaults, but the English line held firm. Then, in a moment of deception and brilliance, William's forces feigned a retreat, tricking the English into breaking formation. As Harold's soldiers pursued the fleeing Normans, William's cavalry turned and slaughtered them in open ground. As the battle raged on, an arrow, possibly fired by a Norman archer, struck King Harold in the eye, killing him instantly. With their leader dead, the English forces collapsed, and the Normans claimed victory. Following his triumph at Hastings, William marched to London, crushing any remaining resistance. On December 25, 1066, he was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey, marking the official beginning of Norman rule. William, now known as William the Conqueror, transformed England's monarchy in ways that still impact Britain today. The Norman conquest was not just a change in leadership, it was a complete overhaul of English society, government, and culture. William introduced feudalism. He divided England into territories controlled by his most loyal Norman barons, ensuring their loyalty while reducing the power of local Anglo-Saxon lords. The Domesday Book, 1086, a vast survey of England's wealth and land, allowing William to tax the population more efficiently. Castles and fortifications to prevent rebellions. The Normans built castles across England, including the Tower of London, a symbol of Norman power. A new aristocracy, the old Anglo-Saxon elite, was replaced by Norman nobles, who spoke French and introduced new customs. Legal and administrative changes. William strengthened the monarchy by introducing a centralized legal system, reducing the power of local lords. This transformation made England one of the most powerful medieval kingdoms in Europe. Though William had won the throne, his rule was not uncontested. Rebellions broke out across England, particularly in the north, where many Anglo-Saxons resisted Norman rule. William responded with brutal force, leading to the infamous harrying of the north, 1069 to 1070, where entire villages were burned and thousands of people were killed to crush resistance. Despite these uprisings, William successfully secured his dynasty, ensuring that England would remain under Norman control for generations. His reign set the precedent for a powerful, centralized monarchy, and his descendants would rule England for centuries. The Norman conquest changed England forever. It was not just a military victory, it reshaped the monarchy, the aristocracy, and the very structure of English governance. Over time, the Normans and Anglo-Saxons merged into one people, creating what we now recognize as English culture. William's rule laid the foundation for many of Britain's royal traditions, and his lineage continues to influence the British monarchy today. Every English monarch since William the Conqueror has been his direct descendant, making him the true founder of the modern British royal family. The Battle of Hastings in 1066 was a turning point in English history, ushering in a new royal dynasty and transforming the nation. The Anglo-Saxon era had ended, and a new monarchy, one of castles, knights, and centralized power, had begun. But William's dynasty would not rule without challenges. In the next chapter, we will explore the Plantagenets, one of the most powerful royal families in medieval England. Their reign would bring great expansion, legendary kings, and brutal conflicts, including the infamous Wars of the Roses. As the dust settled after the Norman conquest, England entered a new era of monarchy, one dominated by the Plantagenets, a dynasty that would rule for over 3 centuries. This period, spanning from 1154 to 1485, saw England grow into a formidable European power, but it was also marked by bitter rivalries, internal strife, and legendary figures whose legacies still shape Britain today. From the legal reforms of Henry II to the Magna Carta, from the 100 Years' War to the Wars of the Roses, the Plantagenet era was a time of immense change. It was a dynasty of ambition, betrayal, and some of the most famous kings in history, including Richard the Lionheart, Edward III, and Henry V. The Plantagenet dynasty began with Henry II, who ascended the throne in 1154. He was not just the King of England. He ruled a vast empire that stretched across England, much of France, and parts of Ireland and Wales. His marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the time, further strengthened his control over France. Henry II is best known for his legal reforms, which laid the foundation for the English legal system still in use today. He introduced trial by jury, replacing trial by combat and ordeal. Common law, a system that ensured legal consistency across the kingdom. Royal courts, which limited the power of local barons. But his reign was not without turmoil. His greatest conflict came from within, the famous power struggle with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Henry II and Becket had once been allies, but their relationship soured when Becket began defending the Church's authority over the monarchy. The conflict reached its peak in 1170, when Henry, in a moment of frustration, is said to have uttered, "Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?" For knights took this as a command and murdered Becket in Canterbury Cathedral, shocking the kingdom. Becket was later declared a saint, and Henry was forced to perform public penance, walking barefoot to Canterbury and allowing himself to be whipped by monks. This event highlighted the ongoing struggle between the monarchy and the church, a battle that would continue for centuries. After Henry II's death, his son Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, became king in 1189. He is one of England's most famous monarchs, but ironically, he spent less than 6 months of his 10-year reign in England. Instead, Richard devoted his rule to the Third Crusade, leading Christian forces against Saladin, the Muslim leader who had recaptured Jerusalem. Richard was a brilliant warrior, earning legendary status for his military exploits, but his absence left England politically unstable. While Richard fought in the Holy Land, his brother John schemed to seize power. This set the stage for one of England's most infamous kings. King John, 1199 to 1216, is often remembered as one of the worst kings in English history. He lost almost all of England's territories in France, heavily taxed his people, and clashed with the church and nobles. His reign was so disastrous that he became the villain in Robin Hood legends. In 1215, after years of misrule, England's barons rebelled, forcing John to sign the Magna Carta, one of the most important documents in history. This charter limited the king's power, establishing that no ruler was above the law, gave rights to the nobility, laying the foundation for English democracy, established the right to a fair trial, influencing legal systems worldwide. Although John tried to ignore the Magna Carta, his death in 1216 prevented further rebellion. His 9-year-old son, Henry III, inherited the throne, ushering in a period of political instability that continued for generations. By the 14th century, England was embroiled in the 100 Years' War, 1337 to 1453, a conflict with France that defined the Plantagenet era. The war, lasting over a century, saw some of England's greatest victories and most humiliating defeats. One of the most famous kings of this period was Edward III, 1327 to 1377, who claimed the French throne and led England into war. His son, the legendary Black Prince, became one of England's most feared warriors. But the greatest moment came under Henry V, 1413 to 1422, at the Battle of Agincourt, 1415. Outnumbered and facing a powerful French army, Henry's forces used the English longbow to devastate the enemy, securing a historic victory. This battle cemented England's military reputation and inspired Shakespeare's famous play, Henry V. Despite military success, internal divisions plagued the Plantagenet dynasty. By the mid-15th century, England descended into civil war, the Wars of the Roses, 1455 to 1485. This brutal conflict was fought between two rival branches of the Plantagenet family. The House of Lancaster, Red Rose, led by Henry VI. The House of York, White Rose, led by Edward IV and later Richard III. The war saw kings overthrown, royal betrayals, and fierce battles, culminating in the Battle of Bosworth Field, 1485, where Henry Tudor, Henry VII, defeated Richard III. Henry VII's victory ended the Plantagenet dynasty and established the Tudor monarchy, marking the beginning of a new royal era. The Plantagenet era was one of war, reform, and immense change. It shaped England's political structure, saw the rise of Parliament, and gave birth to some of its most legendary kings. The Magna Carta, the 100 Years' War, and the Wars of the Roses all left lasting marks on English history. But as one dynasty fell, another rose to take its place. The Tudors, beginning with Henry VII, would go on to define the next great chapter in British monarchy, one that included Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and the English Reformation. The Plantagenets were a dynasty of ambition, betrayal, and conquest. They built England into a powerful kingdom but ultimately fell to their own internal conflicts. The stage was now set for the Tudor era, a time of royal marriages, religious upheaval, and the birth of the modern British state. In the next chapter, we will dive into Henry VIII, the most infamous Tudor king, and his dramatic break from the Catholic Church, a decision that would change England forever. As the Plantagenets fell at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, a new dynasty rose to take their place, the Tudors. This family would rule England for over a century, ushering in one of the most transformative eras in British history. The Tudors were known for their strong personalities, political cunning, and absolute authority. Their reign saw some of the most famous monarchs in history, including Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. It was a time of religious upheaval, artistic flourishing, and England's rise as a major world power. From the creation of the Church of England to the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the Tudors left an indelible mark on British history. But their dynasty was also filled with betrayal, executions, and dramatic conflicts that shaped the fate of the nation. The Tudor dynasty began with Henry VII, who defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. Henry was a skilled politician who knew that to maintain power, he had to unite England. To solidify his rule, he married Elizabeth of York, the daughter of Edward IV. This union ended the Wars of the Roses, bringing peace between the rival houses of Lancaster and York. Henry VII was ruthless in securing his throne. He eliminated threats, built a strong financial system, and ensured the Tudor dynasty would survive. But it was his son, Henry VIII, who would truly redefine England's future. No Tudor is more famous or infamous than Henry VIII, 1509 to 1547. He was a larger-than-life figure, charismatic, intelligent, and brutally ambitious. His reign was marked by 6 marriages, the English Reformation, and a dramatic break from the Catholic Church. Henry VIII is best known for his desperate quest for a male heir. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, failed to produce a surviving son, leading Henry to seek an annulment from the Pope. When the Pope refused, Henry took a radical step. He broke away from the Catholic Church and declared himself supreme head of the Church of England in 1534. This event, known as the English Reformation, had monumental consequences. Catholic monasteries were dissolved, and their wealth was taken by the crown. Religious conflict erupted, dividing England between Catholics and Protestants. The Church of England was born, making England a Protestant nation. Henry's personal life was just as dramatic as his political actions. His 6 wives met various fates, Catherine of Aragon divorced, and Boleyn executed. Jane Seymour died after childbirth. Anne of Cleves divorced. Catherine Howard executed. Catherine Parr survived. His obsession with securing a male heir finally succeeded with Edward VI, but Henry's brutal reign left England in turmoil. Henry VIII's only son, Edward VI, 1547 to 1553, became king at just 9 years old. A staunch Protestant, Edward continued his father's religious reforms. However, he was sickly and died at just 15, leaving England in crisis. In a controversial move, Protestant nobles placed Lady Jane Grey on the throne, but she was quickly overthrown by Mary I, 1553 to 1558, Henry VIII's Catholic daughter. Mary I, known as Bloody Mary, attempted to restore Catholicism in England. She married Philip II of Spain, a powerful Catholic ruler, and launched a violent persecution of Protestants, burning hundreds at the stake. But her reign was short-lived. She died in 1558, leaving the throne to her half-sister, Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen and England's Golden Age. Elizabeth I, 1558 to 1603, is one of England's most celebrated monarchs. Her reign, known as the Elizabethan era, saw England rise to great power, cultural brilliance, and military triumph. Elizabeth was a Protestant, but she took a moderate approach to religion, avoiding the extreme policies of her predecessors. She skillfully balanced power, outmaneuvered political rivals, and resisted marriage, earning her the title the Virgin Queen. Her greatest challenge came from Spain. In 1588, the powerful Spanish Armada, sent by Philip II, attempted to invade England. Against all odds, Elizabeth's navy defeated the Armada, marking England's rise as a dominant naval power. The Elizabethan age was also a time of cultural flourishing. This was the era of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and the English Renaissance. But Elizabeth's reign ended without an heir, and with her death in 1603, the Tudor dynasty came to an end. The Tudors transformed England. Under their rule, the monarchy became stronger than ever before. The Church of England was created, permanently altering British religion. England emerged as a global naval power after the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Cultural and artistic achievements flourished, shaping English identity. But the end of the Tudors did not mean stability. With no direct Tudor heir, the throne passed to the Stuarts, leading to a new era of royal conflicts, civil war, and the dramatic execution of a king. The Tudor era was a period of dramatic change, power struggles, and lasting impact. It witnessed the Reformation, political upheaval, and the birth of modern England. As we move into the next chapter, we will explore the rise of the Stuarts, a dynasty that would face rebellions, revolutions, and the first execution of an English king. The Tudor legacy was one of strength and transformation, but the Stuart dynasty would test the very limits of the monarchy itself. With the death of Elizabeth I in 1603, the mighty Tudor dynasty came to an end. There was no direct Tudor heir, and so the throne passed to the Stuarts, a Scottish royal family descended from Henry VII's eldest daughter, Margaret Tudor. The first Stuart king, James I of England, James VI of Scotland, inherited a powerful but unstable nation. The Stuart era, 1603 to 1714, would prove to be one of the most tumultuous periods in British history. It saw civil war, the execution of a king, the rise of Parliament's power, and two major revolutions. The concept of the divine right of kings was put to the test, and by the end of the dynasty, Britain had transformed from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional one. The Stuarts would not rule unchallenged. Their reign would be marked by conflict, as kings and queens fought against Parliament. Religious divisions deepened, and the people of Britain questioned the power of their rulers like never before. In 1603, James VI of Scotland became James I of England, uniting the two crowns and laying the foundation for Great Britain. James was an intelligent but arrogant ruler who believed deeply in the divine right of kings, the idea that a monarch's authority came directly from God and should not be limited by Parliament. But England had changed since the days of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Parliament was growing in power, and religious tensions between Protestants and Catholics were reaching a breaking point. One of the most famous events of James's reign was the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. A group of Catholic conspirators, led by Guy Fawkes, attempted to blow up Parliament and assassinate the king. The plot was discovered, and the conspirators were executed, but anti-Catholic sentiment in England intensified. James also oversaw the creation of the King James Bible, 1611, one of the most influential translations of the Bible in history. However, his financial mismanagement and ongoing clashes with Parliament set the stage for deeper conflicts under his son and successor, Charles I. If James I struggled with Parliament, his son Charles I, 1625 to 1649, outright refused to compromise. Like his father, Charles believed in absolute monarchy, but he took things even further. He ruled without Parliament for 11 years, 1629 to 1640, making decisions alone and raising taxes without approval. His arrogance, combined with religious and political conflicts, led to civil war. By 1642, England was split between two sides: Royalists, Cavaliers, those who supported Charles I and his belief in absolute monarchy; Parliamentarians, Roundheads, those who wanted a constitutional monarchy and opposed Charles's rule. The conflict, known as the English Civil War, 1642 to 1651, ended in victory for Parliament, led by Oliver Cromwell. In 1649, Charles I was captured, put on trial for treason, and executed, the first and only English king to be publicly beheaded. For the first time, England had no king. Instead, Oliver Cromwell ruled as Lord Protector, turning England into a republic called the Commonwealth. But Cromwell's rule was strict and unpopular, and after his death, the people wanted a return to the monarchy. In 1660, the monarchy was restored under Charles II, son of the executed Charles I. His return was met with celebration, and he became known as the Merry Monarch for his love of entertainment, parties, and culture. However, Charles II faced ongoing religious conflicts and tensions with Parliament. Although he was outwardly Protestant, he secretly supported Catholicism, which created deep distrust. His reign saw major events such as the Great Plague, 1665, a devastating outbreak of the bubonic plague that killed thousands; the Great Fire of London, 1666, a massive fire that destroyed much of the city. Despite these crises, Charles II maintained a delicate balance between monarchy and Parliament, something his successor would fail to do. When Charles II died in 1685, his brother James II took the throne. Unlike Charles, James was an openly Catholic king ruling over a Protestant nation. James attempted to impose Catholic rule in England, dismissing Parliament and replacing Protestant officials with Catholics. His actions caused widespread fear that England would fall under Catholic absolutism, similar to France under Louis XIV. By 1688, Parliament had had enough. They invited William of Orange and his wife Mary, James II's Protestant daughter, to take the throne. William arrived with an army, but instead of fighting, James II fled to France. This event, known as the Glorious Revolution, marked the end of absolute monarchy in England. It was a bloodless revolution, but its effects were profound. Monarchs would now rule with the consent of Parliament, setting the stage for constitutional monarchy. Following the Glorious Revolution, William III and Mary II signed the English Bill of Rights, 1689. This document permanently established Parliament's authority over the monarchy, the right to free speech within Parliament, the requirement that kings and queens be Protestant. The Bill of Rights was a turning point in British history. No longer could monarchs rule by divine right alone. Instead, power was shared between the king and Parliament, paving the way for modern democracy. The last Stuart monarch was Queen Anne, 1702 to 1714. During her reign, England and Scotland officially united to form Great Britain under the Act of Union, 1707, and died without an heir, and so the British crown passed to the House of Hanover, a German royal family with distant ties to the Stuarts. This marked the end of the Stuart dynasty and the beginning of a new era of British rule. The Stuarts oversaw some of the most pivotal moments in British history, the English Civil War, which challenged the power of the monarchy, the execution of a king, proving that no ruler was above the law, the Glorious Revolution, which established the principle of constitutional monarchy, the English Bill of Rights, which set the foundation for democracy. Under the Stuarts, Britain went from an absolute monarchy to a parliamentary system, a transformation that would shape the nation for centuries. The Stuart era was one of unrest, rebellion, and revolution, but it was also the period that defined Britain's future. It tested the limits of royal authority, and by its end, it was clear that monarchs could no longer rule unchecked. As we move forward in the history of the British royal family, we will see the rise of the Hanoverians, a dynasty that would oversee colonial expansion, the Industrial Revolution, and the shaping of the modern British Empire. As the Stuart dynasty came to an end, Britain stood at the dawn of a new era. The crown now passed to the House of Hanover, a German royal family that had little direct connection to the British people. Yet, under the Hanoverians, Britain would undergo monumental transformations, becoming the world's most powerful empire, leading the Industrial Revolution, and seeing democracy evolve like never before. The Hanoverian era, 1714 to 1901, spanned nearly 2 centuries and brought with it war, revolution, and reform. It saw the loss of the American colonies, the defeat of Napoleon, the rise of industrialization, and the reign of the legendary Queen Victoria. It was an age of expansion, enlightenment, and empire, but also of great challenges that shaped the Britain we know today. The first Hanoverian king was George I, who took the throne in 1714. Born in Germany, he barely spoke a word of English and had little understanding of British customs or politics. Many Britons saw him as a foreigner, and he faced strong opposition, particularly from Jacobite rebels who wanted to restore the exiled Stuart family to the throne. Recognizing his limitations, George I relied heavily on ministers to govern the country. This shift in power was crucial. It marked the beginning of the modern British government, where the monarchy played a ceremonial role, while real power lay with Parliament and the Prime Minister. It was during George I's reign that the position of Prime Minister truly took shape, with Sir Robert Walpole becoming the first person to lead Britain in this role. This laid the foundation for Britain's constitutional monarchy, where the king or queen would reign, but not rule. George II, 1727 to 1760, continued his father's hands-off approach to ruling, leaving much of the government in the hands of Parliament. However, his reign was marked by military conflict and colonial expansion. The War of Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, and the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, made Britain a global superpower, strengthening its hold on territories in India, North America, and the Caribbean. In 1745, the Jacobite Rebellion, led by Bonnie Prince Charlie, attempted to overthrow George II and restore the Stuarts. The rebellion ended in defeat at the Battle of Culloden, 1746, crushing any hopes of a Stuart comeback. Britain's navy became the most powerful in the world, securing trade routes and increasing colonial influence. During this time, Britain's empire was growing, but so were its problems, especially in the American colonies, where tensions were brewing. George III, 1760 to 1820, was one of Britain's longest-reigning monarchs and perhaps one of its most controversial. His reign was a period of great turmoil and transformation, including the loss of America and the defeat of Napoleon. At the start of his rule, Britain was at its height of imperial dominance, but his government's policies led to a major disaster: the American Revolution, 1775 to 1783. The American colonists, angered by taxation without representation, rebelled against British rule. The war ended in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence, and by 1783, Britain had officially lost its American colonies. This was a huge blow to Britain, but it did not stop its imperial ambitions. Instead, Britain turned its focus to India, Australia, and Africa, expanding its empire elsewhere. Despite this loss, George III was later celebrated for Britain's victory in the Napoleonic Wars, 1803 to 1815. Under his reign, Britain defeated Napoleon Bonaparte at the Battle of Waterloo, 1815. securing its place as the most powerful nation in Europe. However, George III's later years were plagued by mental illness. He suffered from recurring bouts of insanity, and by 1811, he was deemed unfit to rule. His son, George IV, ruled as Prince Regent, marking the start of the Regency era. With George III mentally unfit to rule, his son George IV took over in 1811, officially becoming king in 1820. Unlike his father, George IV was more interested in luxury and entertainment than politics. His reign was a time of cultural growth, particularly in art, architecture, and fashion, but his extravagant lifestyle and lavish spending made him unpopular with the people. Politically, the period saw the abolition of the slave trade 1807 and increasing pressure for social reform. Calls for Catholic emancipation, allowing Catholics to participate in British politics. George IV's legacy was mostly one of scandal and excess, and he was widely seen as a poor ruler. His successor, William IV, brought some stability but only ruled for 7 years, 1830 to 1837. Then came the most defining monarch of the Hanoverian era, Queen Victoria. Victoria became queen in 1837 at just 18 years old, and her reign lasted over 63 years, a period now known as the Victorian era, 1837 to 1901. Under Victoria, Britain underwent massive industrial, social, and political changes, transforming into the world's leading empire. Key events of the Victorian era. The Industrial Revolution. Britain became the world's first industrialized nation, with major advancements in technology, factories, railways, and urbanization. The British Empire reached its peak, controlling vast territories across India, Africa, Australia, and Canada. Social and political reforms improved conditions for workers, children, and women. The Great Exhibition of 1851, showcasing Britain's industrial and scientific progress. Victoria was a symbol of stability and progress, guiding Britain through one of its most significant transformations. However, by the end of her reign, challenges such as growing demands for democracy and independence movements in the empire were beginning to emerge. When Queen Victoria died in 1901, the Hanoverian dynasty came to an end. Her son, Edward VII, was part of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, marking the beginning of a new royal house. The Hanoverian period had seen Britain transform from a constitutional monarchy to a global empire, leading the world in industry, trade, and political change. However, the challenges of the 20th century, including 2 world wars and the decline of the empire, would shape the next phase of British royal history. The Hanoverians ruled during one of the most dynamic periods in British history. They oversaw the expansion of the British Empire, the Industrial Revolution, and the birth of modern democracy. Their reign saw the loss of America, the defeat of Napoleon, the rise of Victorian Britain, and the emergence of constitutional monarchy as we know it today. Though they started as foreign rulers, by the end of the dynasty, the British monarchy was firmly established as a central part of the nation's identity. As we move forward in our journey through the history of the British royal family, we now enter the era of the 20th century, where the monarchy would face war, change, and survival in the modern world. The 19th century dawned with Britain standing at the precipice of immense transformation. As the Napoleonic Wars came to an end, the British Empire expanded to unprecedented levels, and the country stood at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution. But no figure would come to define this era more than Queen Victoria, whose reign would not only reshape the monarchy, but also leave an indelible mark on history. Born in 1819, Victoria was the daughter of Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld. She was not originally expected to become queen, but fate had other plans. By the time she was just 18 years old, her uncle, King William IV, had passed away without a legitimate heir, making her the Queen of the United Kingdom in 1837. Her coronation marked the beginning of what would be one of the longest reigns in British history, spanning 63 years. It was a period of rapid social, political, and economic change. The monarchy, once seen as an outdated institution, found a new purpose under her reign. Victoria embraced the role of a constitutional monarch, ensuring that the royal family remained relevant in a world increasingly dominated by democracy and industrial progress. But despite her royal stature, Victoria's personal life became one of her most defining features. In 1840, she married her cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, in what was one of the most celebrated unions in European history. Unlike many royal marriages of the past, theirs was one of deep love and respect. Albert was not just her consort, but also her closest advisor and supporter. Together, they had 9 children, whose marriages would forge alliances across Europe, earning Victoria the nickname Grandmother of Europe. Under Victoria and Albert, the British monarchy became a model of domestic virtue, a stark contrast to the scandals and excesses of previous rulers. Their family life was carefully curated to present an image of stability, morality, and duty, making the monarchy more relatable to the British public than ever before. But the Victorian age wasn't just about the royal family. It was an era of innovation, expansion, and upheaval. The Industrial Revolution turned Britain into the workshop of the world, with factories, railways, and steamships transforming everyday life. Meanwhile, the British Empire reached its height, spanning nearly a quarter of the globe, from India to Africa, Australia, and the Caribbean. However, Victoria's reign was not without hardship. In 1861, tragedy struck when Prince Albert died of typhoid fever at just 42 years old. Devastated, Victoria plunged into deep mourning, wearing black for the rest of her life and rarely making public appearances. For a time, her withdrawal led to criticisms that she had abandoned her royal duties. But despite her grief, she eventually resumed her role, proving her resilience as a monarch. As Britain moved into the late 19th century, new challenges arose. The Irish question, calls for political reform, and the changing social landscape all tested the monarchy's ability to adapt. Yet, Queen Victoria remained a symbol of British strength, embodying the very essence of the empire she ruled over. By the time of her death in 1901, the world had changed dramatically. The Victorian age had been one of unparalleled expansion, technological progress, and imperial dominance. But as a new century dawned, Britain stood at a crossroads. The next monarch would have to navigate a world that was increasingly uncertain, setting the stage for the next chapter in the British royal family's extraordinary history. As the dawn of the 20th century approached, Queen Victoria's death in 1901 marked the end of an era. After 63 years on the throne, she left behind an empire at its zenith, yet one on the brink of transformation. The weight of the crown now passed to her eldest son, King Edward VII, a man who had spent decades in his mother's shadow, waiting for his moment to rule. Edward had long been seen as a playboy prince, indulging in luxury, fine dining, and socializing with aristocrats across Europe. But beneath his reputation as a socialite lay a keen political mind. At the age of 59, he was finally crowned king, ushering in what would come to be known as the Edwardian era, a time of both glamour and growing tensions. Unlike his mother, who had preferred solitude in her later years, Edward VII embraced public life. He was a charming diplomat, well-liked by European monarchs and politicians. He played a crucial role in strengthening Britain's alliances, particularly with France, helping to establish what would later be known as the Entente Cordiale, an agreement that would reshape European geopolitics in the years to come. However, while the Edwardian era was often romanticized as a golden age, it was also a time of rising social change. The rigid structures of the Victorian class system began to crack. The working class demanded better wages and conditions, women pushed harder for the right to vote, and the suffragette movement gained momentum. Industrialization continued at full force, leading to technological advancements such as automobiles, airplanes, and the expansion of electricity. The monarchy, too, had to evolve. Edward, despite his love of luxury, recognized the importance of staying connected with his subjects. He made royal visits to the poorer districts of Britain, winning admiration for his willingness to engage with all classes of society. The image of a more accessible and relatable monarchy began to take shape, one that would help secure its place in an ever-changing world. However, beneath the surface of prosperity, global tensions simmered. The balance of power in Europe was shifting, Germany, under Kaiser Wilhelm II, was growing increasingly militaristic, sparking an arms race between the major powers. Britain, with its unmatched naval dominance, saw Germany's rising fleet as a direct threat. The seeds of the First World War were being sown, though few could foresee the devastation that lay ahead. In 1910, after just 9 years on the throne, Edward VII passed away from illness. His reign had been brief yet pivotal. He had modernized the monarchy's image, strengthened diplomatic ties, and navigated a rapidly evolving world. His son, George V, would now inherit not just the throne but the immense challenges of a century on the brink of global conflict. As Britain stood at the edge of war and social upheaval, the monarchy faced its greatest test yet. How would it endure the storms ahead? The next chapter in the royal family's history would be one of war, revolution, and survival in an uncertain world. The year was 1910, and as King George V ascended to the throne, Britain stood on the precipice of an era that would test its monarchy like never before. Though George was not as charismatic as his father, Edward VII, he was a dedicated and dutiful king, determined to preserve the stability of the British monarchy in a world that was rapidly changing. However, nothing could have prepared him for the storm that was about to engulf Europe, the First World War. By 1914, tensions in Europe had reached their breaking point. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria triggered a chain reaction that led to the outbreak of World War I. Britain, bound by alliances and its role as a global power, was pulled into the conflict against Germany and its allies. For George V, the war posed an unprecedented challenge. The British royal family, though deeply entrenched in British identity, had strong German ties, a fact that did not go unnoticed by the public. King George himself was first cousins with Kaiser Wilhelm II, the ruler of Germany, which led to suspicion and anti-German sentiment within Britain. Many questioned the loyalty of the monarchy, and Republican voices began to grow louder. To counter these rising tensions, George V made a historic decision, one that would redefine the British monarchy for generations. In 1917, he renounced all German titles held by the royal family and changed the name of the dynasty from the German-sounding House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to the more patriotic House of Windsor. It was a symbolic but critical move, reinforcing the idea that the monarchy was wholly British and not tied to enemy nations. Unlike past wars where monarchs led their armies into battle, George V remained in Britain, focusing on boosting morale. He frequently visited the front lines, met with wounded soldiers in hospitals, and rallied the public to support the war effort. His queen, Mary of Teck, played a crucial role as well, engaging in charity work, fundraising, and supporting war relief efforts. Meanwhile, across Europe, monarchies were collapsing. The Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, who was another of George V's cousins, was overthrown in 1917 during the Russian Revolution. The German and Austro-Hungarian empires fell soon after, as the war shattered the old world order. George V faced a moral dilemma when his cousin, the deposed Tsar Nicholas II, pleaded for asylum in Britain. Though personally sympathetic, George feared that bringing the Russian royals to Britain would spark political unrest. Ultimately, he refused to grant them refuge, a decision that would later haunt him, as Nicholas and his family were executed by the Bolsheviks in 1918. By 1918, the war finally came to an end, but Britain was left physically, economically, and emotionally drained. Over 700,000 British soldiers had died, and the empire faced financial strain like never before. As the dust settled, republicanism had gained traction, and the monarchy faced new questions. Was it still relevant? Could it survive in the modern world? George V knew that survival depended on adaptation, so he took steps to modernize the institution. He downsized the royal family, removing lesser royals from official duties, and aligned the monarchy more closely with the British people. Despite the hardships, George V's leadership during the war had cemented the monarchy's role as a unifying force in Britain. While many other royal houses across Europe had crumbled, the House of Windsor endured, emerging as stronger and more closely tied to the people than ever before. However, the world was not done testing the monarchy. The 1920s and 30s would bring new political instability, economic depression, and another global war, forcing Britain's royals to navigate yet another era of uncertainty. Would the House of Windsor continue to stand firm? The next chapter in its history would prove just how resilient the British monarchy truly was. As World War I faded into history, Britain emerged victorious but deeply scarred. The 1920s and 1930s would bring economic struggles, political shifts, and a looming global conflict, all of which tested the resilience of the British monarchy. At the heart of this turbulent era was a crisis unlike any before, one that would shake the monarchy to its core and force it to redefine its role in the modern world. By the early 1920s, Britain was no longer the same empire it had been before the Great War. Though still one of the world's most powerful nations, its economy was in severe decline. The cost of war had been astronomical, and industrial jobs were vanishing. Unemployment soared, labor strikes became common, and social unrest threatened to unravel the delicate fabric of British society. Meanwhile, the monarchy faced growing scrutiny. King George V, though respected for his leadership during the war, understood that the royal family had to evolve. He embraced a more visible and relatable monarchy, making more public appearances and increasing philanthropic efforts. However, the greatest challenge to the monarchy was still to come, one that would not come from war, politics, or the economy, but from within the royal family itself. In 1936, after 26 years on the throne, King George V passed away. His eldest son, Edward VIII, took the crown. Charismatic, charming, and modern, Edward was popular among the people, but there was one problem. He was deeply in love with an American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. At the time, the Church of England, of which the king was the head, did not permit remarriage after divorce if the former spouse was still alive. Wallis had already been divorced once and was in the process of divorcing her second husband. The idea of a British king marrying a twice-divorced American woman was considered a scandal, one that threatened the stability of the monarchy. For Edward, however, there was no question. He loved Wallis and he wanted to marry her. But the government, the Church of England, and even his own family strongly opposed the idea. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin warned that the British public would never accept Wallis as queen, and that Edward would have to choose between the throne and his love. What followed was one of the most shocking moments in British royal history. In December 1936, just 11 months after becoming king, Edward VIII abdicated the throne, choosing Wallis over his royal duty. In a historic radio broadcast, he addressed the nation, saying, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." With those words, he became the first and only British monarch to voluntarily step down. His younger brother, George VI, was suddenly thrust into a role he never expected, setting the stage for a reign defined by war, resilience, and transformation. George VI, father of the future Queen Elizabeth II, was a stark contrast to his brother. He was reserved, shy, and struggled with a speech impediment, which made public speaking difficult. However, despite his initial hesitation, he understood the weight of his duty. His reign began at a time when Britain was standing at the edge of yet another global war. The world was watching. Would the new king rise to the occasion, or would the monarchy crumble under the weight of its recent scandals? As fascism spread across Europe and Adolf Hitler's Germany threatened global stability, the British royal family would soon find itself in the heart of yet another defining moment in history. The Second World War was approaching, and the monarchy was about to face one of its greatest tests yet. As King George VI took the throne in 1936, Britain was already witnessing the ominous rise of fascist regimes across Europe. By 1939, Adolf Hitler had invaded Poland, forcing Britain and France to declare war on Nazi Germany. The world was once again engulfed in a brutal conflict, World War II. For the British monarchy, this war would be unlike any other. It would test their resilience, their relevance, and their connection to the people. King George VI and his family would have to navigate bombings, political turmoil, and the ever-present question, would the monarchy survive another world war? Unlike previous monarchs who remained distant from conflicts, King George VI understood that his presence and leadership were crucial. From the very beginning, he refused to leave London, despite the dangers of German bombings. While many officials urged him to evacuate to Canada, he and Queen Elizabeth, later known as the Queen Mother, stayed at Buckingham Palace to share the struggles of their people. In September 1940, during the height of the Blitz, Buckingham Palace itself was bombed 9 times. When a German bomb exploded in the palace courtyard, narrowly missing the royal family, Queen Elizabeth famously stated, "I'm glad we have been bombed. Now we can look the East End in the face." This act of solidarity strengthened public admiration for the monarchy. The royal family was no longer just a symbol of tradition. They were seen as part of the British people's suffering and resilience. Even the young Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth II, took on responsibilities. At just 14 years old, she made her first radio broadcast on the BBC's Children's Hour, offering words of comfort to young evacuees separated from their families. As the war progressed, Elizabeth insisted on contributing more directly. At the age of 18, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, training as a mechanic and military truck driver. She became the first female royal to actively serve in the British Armed Forces, an act that won her admiration and respect across the nation. One of George VI's greatest allies during the war was Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The two men developed a deep friendship built on mutual respect and a shared determination to see Britain through the conflict. Churchill kept the king informed on war strategies, political decisions, and global developments. He also understood the symbolic power of the monarchy, a constant, reassuring presence during uncertain times. Together, they worked to boost national morale, rallying the people to continue the fight against Nazi Germany. By 1944, the war had begun to turn in the Allies' favor. On June 6, 1944, the massive D-Day invasion was launched, marking the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. George VI delivered a stirring speech on the radio, calling upon the nation to stand strong in the final push toward victory. Finally, on May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered, marking victory in Europe V-Day. London erupted in celebration, with crowds gathering outside Buckingham Palace, chanting for the king and queen. But perhaps the most famous moment of the day came when Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret secretly joined the crowds, walking through the streets of London to experience the joy of their people firsthand. Elizabeth later recalled it as one of the most memorable nights of her life. World War II fundamentally changed Britain, the empire, and the monarchy itself. The British people had seen a different kind of royal family, one that stood with them in times of crisis, shared their hardships, and proved its relevance in the modern world. Yet, the war also accelerated the decline of the British Empire. Britain was now financially exhausted, and nationalist movements in colonies like India and Africa were gaining momentum. A new era was dawning, one that would challenge the monarchy in ways it had never faced before. With the war over, King George VI had secured the monarchy's place in British life. But he would not live to see the full transformation of the empire into a commonwealth. That responsibility would fall to his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth II. As Britain moved into the second half of the 20th century, the monarchy would face its greatest transition yet. As Britain emerged from the devastation of World War II, the nation faced a new era of challenges: economic recovery, decolonization, and the shifting global balance of power. At the center of it all was King George VI, who had won the admiration of his people by standing with them through war. However, the strain of leadership had taken a heavy toll on his health. By the early 1950s, it became clear that the king's reign was coming to an end, not because of abdication or scandal, but because of his failing health. This chapter marks one of the most significant transitions in the history of the British monarchy: the death of King George VI and the rise of Queen Elizabeth II, ushering in a new chapter for the royal family and the world. Although King George VI had led his country with strength and dignity throughout World War II, the stress of the war and his lifelong struggle with a speech impediment had weakened him. He was a heavy smoker, and by 1948, he began suffering from severe arterial disease. In 1951, he was diagnosed with lung cancer, though the full extent of his illness was kept hidden from the public. That same year, he underwent surgery to remove his left lung. His health continued to deteriorate rapidly, and his public appearances became less frequent. Despite his illness, the king insisted on carrying out his duties, including seeing off his daughter, Princess Elizabeth, and her husband, Prince Philip, as they embarked on a tour of Kenya, Australia, and New Zealand in early 1952. It was the last time Elizabeth would see her father alive. On the night of February 5, 1952, King George VI went to bed at Sandringham House, his royal estate in Norfolk. He was last seen by his valet at midnight, seemingly in good spirits. But by the morning of February 6, 1952, the king had passed away in his sleep from a coronary thrombosis, a blood clot in the heart. He was just 56 years old. His death shocked the nation. Though his declining health was known, the suddenness of his passing still sent waves of grief throughout Britain and the Commonwealth. Flags were lowered to half-mast, and a period of national mourning began. At the time of his death, Princess Elizabeth was thousands of miles away in Kenya, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. Elizabeth and Prince Philip were staying at the Treetops Hotel, a remote lodge in the Kenyan wilderness, when the news of the king's death reached Britain. It was Philip who first received the news from a journalist, and he had the heartbreaking task of informing his wife. The moment Elizabeth heard of her father's passing, she became queen. It is often said that she went up a princess and came down a queen, as she had spent the night in Kenya as heir to the throne and left as the monarch of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. The young queen immediately returned to Britain, her tour cut short. Upon her arrival in London, she was met by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, members of the government and royal courtiers. As she stepped off the plane, the world saw the new face of the monarchy. A 25-year-old woman, unexpectedly thrust into power. Her first act as queen was simple yet significant. She chose to reign as Elizabeth II. The death of King George VI led to an outpouring of grief from the British people. Over 300,000 people lined up for hours to pay their respects as the king lay in state at Westminster Hall. His funeral was held on February 15, 1952, at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle, where he was finally laid to rest. The nation, still recovering from the hardships of World War II, now had to look forward to a new era under a young queen. Despite her youth, Queen Elizabeth II had been well prepared for her new role. She had been raised with a strong sense of duty and service, heavily influenced by her parents' example during the war. She had already served in the military, spoken publicly on behalf of the monarchy, and undertaken royal tours. Her accession to the throne also marked the beginning of a new chapter in British history, one where the monarchy would have to navigate the rapidly changing world of the 20th century. But before she could focus on modernizing the monarchy, there was one major event ahead: her coronation, a grand spectacle that would be the first ever to be televised worldwide. With the death of King George VI, Britain found itself at the dawn of a new Elizabethan age. Though Queen Elizabeth II had officially become monarch the moment her father passed, the world awaited the moment when she would be formally crowned. The coronation was not just a ceremonial event. It was a symbol of continuity, stability, and renewal for Britain and the Commonwealth. It was also a historic first in broadcasting history, marking the beginning of a more modern, media-driven monarchy. This chapter explores the events leading up to the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, the grandeur of the ceremony itself, and how it reshaped the public's perception of the British royal family in the 20th century. After the mourning period for King George VI, preparations for the coronation began immediately. However, such an event required immense planning, so it was scheduled for June 2, 1953, over a year after Elizabeth's accession. The delay allowed time for elaborate arrangements, including security measures, rehearsals, and the production of ceremonial regalia. It also gave the new queen time to settle into her role and travel across the Commonwealth to strengthen relationships with its member nations. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who had also served under Elizabeth's father, saw the coronation as an opportunity to revive national pride after the hardships of World War II. He wanted the event to be a grand spectacle that reminded Britain of its resilience and global influence. One of the most groundbreaking decisions about Elizabeth's coronation was allowing it to be televised. At the time, television was still a developing technology, and there was debate over whether such a sacred event should be broadcast to the public. Many royal advisors believed it should remain a private, elite affair, as it had been for centuries. However, Elizabeth insisted that the ceremony be televised, understanding the power of media to connect the monarchy with the people. This decision marked a turning point. It transformed the monarchy from a distant institution into something far more accessible. When the coronation finally aired, it became one of the most watched broadcasts in history, with an estimated 27 million viewers in Britain alone, out of a population of 36 million. The event was also broadcast in 56 countries, reaching an audience of over 100 million people worldwide. For many, it was the first time they had ever seen a royal ceremony up close. This moment marked the beginning of a new relationship between the monarchy and the media, one that would shape the royal family's public image for decades to come. On the morning of June 2, 1953, the streets of London were lined with millions of people, many of whom had camped overnight just for a glimpse of their new queen. Despite the cold and rainy weather, the city was filled with excitement and a sense of national unity. Queen Elizabeth II, dressed in a white satin gown embroidered with the symbols of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, made her way to Westminster Abbey in the historic gold state coach, a tradition dating back to 1762. Inside Westminster Abbey, the ceremony unfolded with all the grandeur and tradition expected of a British coronation. Over 8,000 guests, including heads of state, prime ministers, and foreign dignitaries, were in attendance. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, led the service, which followed an ancient sequence of rituals that had been practiced for nearly 1,000 years. Key moments of the coronation: the recognition the Queen was presented to the people, who affirmed their loyalty. The oath: Elizabeth took a solemn oath to govern justly, uphold the law, and defend the Church of England. The anointing, the most sacred part of the ceremony, where holy oil was applied to Elizabeth's hands, chest, and head in a moment meant to symbolize divine blessing. The crowning, the climax of the ceremony, where the St. Edward's crown, a 5-pound solid gold crown, was placed on Elizabeth's head. The homage peers of the realm, led by Prince Philip, pledged their allegiance to the new queen. As the ceremony concluded, the bells of Westminster Abbey rang. Cannons fired a royal salute across London, and the nation erupted in celebration. Unlike previous monarchs, Elizabeth II did not just inherit Britain. She inherited an empire in transition. By 1953, the British Empire was shrinking, and many former colonies were moving toward independence. During her coronation speech, she made it clear that she would embrace the idea of a Commonwealth of Nations, where former colonies could maintain a voluntary connection to Britain rather than being ruled by it. This new vision of the monarchy helped modernize its role and ensured its survival in a rapidly changing world. Elizabeth would spend much of her reign strengthening ties with Commonwealth nations, ensuring that Britain remained influential on the world stage. For a war-weary Britain, the coronation was more than just a royal event. It was a symbol of renewal and optimism. The world was changing, and Britain was moving forward with a young, determined queen at its helm. The impact of the coronation was immense. It solidified Elizabeth II's image as a modern monarch, and her decision to televise the event ensured that she became one of the most recognizable figures in the world. Her reign would not be without challenges. The empire would continue to dissolve, the monarchy would face scandals, and Britain itself would undergo profound social and political changes. But on June 2, 1953, none of that was in focus. At that moment, the world celebrated the arrival of a new queen, a symbol of continuity, tradition, and hope for the future. As the mid-20th century transitioned into the late 1900s, Queen Elizabeth II's reign entered a period of profound change. The world was evolving rapidly, and the British monarchy faced new challenges that tested its adaptability, relevance, and resilience. This chapter explores the trials faced by the monarchy in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, including political shifts, public scrutiny, media intrusion, and personal crises within the royal family. The 1960s were a time of cultural and social upheaval. The rigid traditions of past generations were being questioned, and Britain itself was transforming. The monarchy, which had long been associated with formality and mystique, suddenly found itself needing to modernize or risk becoming obsolete. By the 1960s, decolonization had accelerated. Many African, Caribbean, and Asian countries gained independence from British rule, shifting the monarchy's focus toward the Commonwealth rather than direct governance. Elizabeth's challenge was to redefine Britain's influence in this new era. She frequently traveled to newly independent nations, emphasizing cooperation rather than control. With the explosion of television, the royal family was more visible than ever. In 1969, an unprecedented documentary, Royal Family, aired on the BBC, providing an intimate look at the private lives of the royals. While it was initially successful, making the monarchy seem more relatable, it also removed much of the mystique that had once surrounded the institution. Suddenly, the royal family was under constant public observation, and not all attention was favorable. As Prince Charles came of age, public interest in the future king grew. His education, relationships, and personal struggles were increasingly covered by the press. The pressure on him to marry and produce an heir would soon become one of the most talked about royal sagas in history. The 1970s were a difficult decade for Britain. Economic struggles, strikes, and growing dissatisfaction with the government created a tense political atmosphere. The royal family, though not directly involved in politics, was not immune to these challenges. Britain faced a series of economic downturns, leading to widespread strikes and unrest. Some questioned whether the monarchy was still necessary in an era where everyday people struggled financially. One of the most controversial moments of the decade came in 1975, when Australia's Governor-General dismissed Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. Many saw this as a sign that the monarchy still held too much political power, despite being mostly ceremonial. As the Queen's children grew up, their personal lives became tabloid sensations. Princess Anne's marriage to Mark Phillips in 1973 was widely celebrated, but Prince Charles remained the focus of public speculation. By the end of the decade, the pressure for Charles to marry and secure the royal lineage had become overwhelming. The press eagerly speculated about his potential bride, but he remained unmarried and increasingly unhappy in the spotlight. The 1980s are often remembered as one of the most dramatic decades in royal history, largely due to the rise of Lady Diana Spencer and the shifting public perception of the monarchy. In 1981, the world watched as Prince Charles married Lady Diana Spencer in what seemed like a fairy tale romance. The wedding, held at St. Paul's Cathedral, was watched by 750 million people worldwide. Diana's youth, beauty, and natural charm made her an instant global icon. She was unlike any royal before her. Relatable, warm, and deeply compassionate. However, behind the scenes, the marriage was troubled from the start. Charles and Diana were very different people, and his lingering attachment to Camilla Parker Bowles created tension from the beginning. The tabloid media became more aggressive than ever. Every detail of Diana's life was scrutinized, from her fashion choices to her struggles with bulimia and mental health. By the late 1980s, rumors of trouble in the marriage were widespread. Diana was becoming more independent, taking on charity work that focused on HIV, AIDS awareness, homelessness, and landmine victims, causes that made her more beloved than the royal family itself. This shift led to internal tensions within the monarchy, as Diana's growing influence sometimes overshadowed the Queen and Charles himself. In 1986, Prince Andrew married Sarah Ferguson, another high-profile royal wedding. However, like Charles and Diana, their marriage would also face difficulties, eventually leading to divorce in the 1990s. By the end of the 1980s, the royal family was at a crossroads. The world was not as deferential as it had been in the past. Scandals, divorces, and growing media intrusion threatened the monarchy's reputation. Despite these challenges, Queen Elizabeth II remained steadfast, committed to upholding tradition while also allowing slow modernization within the institution. As the royal family entered the 1990s, however, the difficulties would only intensify. The next decade would bring scandal, tragedy, and an unprecedented crisis that would shake the monarchy to its core. The late 20th century had proven that the British monarchy could survive challenges, but the struggles of the 1990s and early 2000s would push it to the brink. The next chapter will explore the devastating events of the 1990s, including Diana's shocking death, the Windsor Castle fire, and the monarchy's most vulnerable moment in modern history. As the British royal family entered the 1990s, it faced one of the most tumultuous decades in its history. What had once been a symbol of stability and tradition was now at the center of scandals, divorces, and public disillusionment. The monarchy's very survival was questioned as personal and institutional crises unfolded in rapid succession. But nothing could prepare the world or the royal family for the tragic death of Princess Diana in 1997, an event that would forever change the monarchy's relationship with the public. This chapter explores the scandals, divorces, controversies, and heartbreak that defined the decade and pushed the British monarchy to the brink. In 1992, Queen Elizabeth II marked 40 years on the throne. But instead of a grand celebration, the year became one of the worst in royal history. The Queen herself would later call it her annus horribilis, a horrible year. The first major crisis of 1992 was the collapse of 3 royal marriages. Prince Charles and Princess Diana officially separated, ending their fairy tale marriage. The press speculated about infidelity on both sides, with Charles's longtime affair with Camilla Parker Bowles becoming public knowledge. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson split after years of rumors about Fergie's wild lifestyle and embarrassing tabloid scandals. Princess and divorced Mark Phillips, though her situation was handled with far less media scrutiny. On November 20th, 1992, a massive fire broke out at Windsor Castle, one of the Queen's official residences. The fire raged for 15 hours, destroying over 100 rooms and causing millions in damages. What made the situation worse was the public outcry over who would pay for the repairs. When it was revealed that taxpayer money might be used, it caused widespread anger, leading to a re-examination of the monarchy's finances. By the end of 1992, the royal family was in crisis mode. To address public anger, Queen Elizabeth II made a historic move. She agreed to pay income tax for the first time in royal history and voluntarily reduced the size of the civil list, cutting down government funding to minor royals. But despite these efforts, the damage had been done. Public support for the monarchy was at an all-time low. The mid-1990s saw the complete breakdown of Prince Charles and Princess Diana's relationship, and it was broadcast to the world. In 1995, Diana gave a now infamous interview with BBC's Panorama, where she famously said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." This interview devastated Charles's reputation. Diana spoke about her struggles with bulimia, depression, and feeling abandoned by the royal family. She also hinted that she did not believe Charles was fit to be king. The interview was a turning point. A few months later, Queen Elizabeth II took the extraordinary step of ordering Charles and Diana to divorce. By 1996, the divorce was finalized, but Diana remained more popular than the monarchy itself. She continued her charity work, using her influence to highlight global issues like AIDS awareness and landmine victims. Then, in August 1997, the unthinkable happened. Princess Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris. She had been chased by paparazzi while traveling with her boyfriend, Dodi Fayed, and their driver crashed inside the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. The world was shocked, devastated, and furious. People blamed the press, the royal family, and even the establishment for her tragic death. But the most damaging moment for the monarchy was its silence. For days after Diana's death, the Queen and the royal family remained in Balmoral, refusing to make a public statement or fly the flag at half-mast. This led to unprecedented public outrage. People gathered outside Buckingham Palace, demanding action, and newspapers criticized the Queen for being cold and unfeeling. Realizing that the monarchy was facing its worst crisis in centuries, Queen Elizabeth II made a rare television address to the nation. She praised Diana as a remarkable woman and expressed her personal grief. She also listened to public demand and ordered the flag to be lowered at half-mast over Buckingham Palace. This speech helped ease public anger, but the damage had been done. Diana's death had fundamentally changed the monarchy's relationship with the British people. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the royal family began to adjust to a new era. Lessons were learned from the Diana crisis, and efforts were made to make the monarchy more approachable. After years of public disapproval, Camilla Parker Bowles was gradually introduced to royal life. In 2005, Charles and Camilla finally married, though the wedding was deliberately low-key to avoid controversy. The young princes, William and Harry, became the focus of hope for the future. As Diana's sons, they were beloved by the public, and their actions helped rebuild trust in the monarchy. Prince William, in particular, was seen as the future king who could truly modernize the monarchy. By the end of the decade, the monarchy had survived its greatest crisis. 3 royal marriages had collapsed. A devastating fire had damaged Windsor Castle. Diana's tragic death had pushed public anger to its peak. But through adaptation and modernization, the royal family endured. The lessons of the 1990s shaped the modern monarchy, forcing it to become more open, more engaged with the public, and more aware of its place in a changing world. As the monarchy entered the 21st century, new challenges awaited. The world was evolving faster than ever, and the royal family needed to keep up with modern expectations. The next chapter will explore how the royal family navigated the early 2000s, including the passing of the Queen Mother, Prince William and Kate Middleton's love story, and Prince Harry's rise as a modern royal. The dawn of the 21st century was a turning point for the British royal family. After surviving the tumultuous 1990s, the monarchy had to modernize, rebuild trust, and redefine its role in an ever-changing world. The early 2000s saw the death of the Queen Mother, the rise of Prince William and Prince Harry, and Prince Charles's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles finally being accepted. The royal family focused on repairing its public image, ensuring its survival in the digital age, and preparing for the next generation of monarchs. This chapter explores how the royal family recovered from its darkest period, embraced new traditions, and took its first steps toward a modern monarchy. In March 2002, the British public bid farewell to one of its most beloved royal figures, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. At 101 years old, she was a symbol of continuity, resilience, and grace. Having served as Queen Consort during World War II, she remained a trusted figure in the monarchy even after her husband, King George VI, passed away in 1952. Her state funeral at Westminster Abbey was attended by royalty from around the world, and thousands lined the streets to pay their respects. The Queen Mother's death marked the end of an era. The last major link to the monarchy of the early 20th century was gone. For Queen Elizabeth II, the loss was deeply personal, but it also signaled that the monarchy had to move forward. With Diana gone and Charles's popularity still struggling, Prince William and Prince Harry became the future of the monarchy. In the early 2000s, Prince William emerged as a global figure. He had inherited his mother's charm and his grandmother's sense of duty, making him the most popular royal of his generation. He studied at St. Andrews University, where he met Kate Middleton, his future wife. He trained at Sandhurst Military Academy and later joined the Royal Air Force as a search and rescue pilot. He became involved in charity work, supporting causes like mental health awareness and conservation. His relationship with Kate Middleton attracted major media attention, with speculation about a future royal wedding growing every year. Unlike his older brother, Prince Harry had a wilder, more rebellious streak. He made headlines for his party lifestyle, even being caught wearing a Nazi uniform at a costume party in 2005, sparking global outrage. He later joined the British Army, serving in Afghanistan and earning respect for his dedication to military service. Like his mother, he developed a deep connection with humanitarian causes, especially through his work with veterans and children in Africa. Although Harry was often seen as the spare prince, his charisma, honesty, and emotional openness made him a key figure in the royal family's modernization efforts. By the early 2000s, public attitudes toward Camilla Parker Bowles had begun to shift. She had once been blamed for the failure of Charles and Diana's marriage, but over time, she won over both the Queen and the public. The royal family carefully managed her public image, portraying her as a loyal and supportive partner to Prince Charles. In 2005, after years of controversy, Prince Charles and Camilla finally married in a modest civil ceremony. Though Camilla would never be as beloved as Diana, her presence in the royal family was no longer a source of division. Instead, it marked a new phase in Charles's life, as he prepared for his eventual reign as king. With the rise of the internet and social media, the monarchy had to adapt or risk becoming irrelevant. The royal website was launched, allowing the public to access royal news online. Televised royal events gained millions of viewers worldwide, proving that the monarchy still had global influence. Social media became a key tool for engaging with younger generations, with William and Harry leading new, modern PR strategies. This shift helped modernize the monarchy's image, making it more accessible and relatable in an era of rapid change. By the mid-2000s, the British royal family had successfully rebranded itself. The loss of the Queen Mother reminded people of the monarchy's historical significance. The popularity of William and Harry gave hope for the future. The acceptance of Camilla helped stabilize Charles's position as heir to the throne. The embrace of digital media helped the monarchy remain relevant to a new generation. The monarchy had survived the scandals of the 1990s and was now stronger than it had been in decades. But new challenges were on the horizon. In the next chapter, we will explore how Prince William and Kate Middleton's engagement, Prince Harry's growing role, and the Queen's Diamond Jubilee cemented the monarchy's place in the 21st century. By the dawn of the 2010s, the British royal family had successfully rebuilt its image. The younger generation, Prince William and Prince Harry, became the face of a modernized monarchy, capturing public interest worldwide. This decade saw royal weddings, the Queen's historic Diamond Jubilee, the birth of a new heir, and increased scrutiny of the royal family's role in society. At the same time, controversies emerged, including Prince Andrew's scandal and Prince Harry's growing tensions with royal life. In this chapter, we will explore how the Windsors navigated the highs and lows of the 2010s, a decade that redefined the monarchy's place in modern Britain. One of the biggest royal events of the decade was the wedding of Prince William and Catherine Kate Middleton on April 29, 2011. Over 2 billion people worldwide watched the ceremony, making it one of the most viewed television events in history. Kate Middleton, a commoner, was welcomed as a future queen, symbolizing a more relatable and modern royal family. The wedding reinforced the monarchy's global appeal, with people celebrating across the UK and beyond. Following their marriage, the couple became the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, and their public duties increased as they prepared for William's eventual reign as king. In 2012, Queen Elizabeth II marked 60 years on the throne, becoming only the second British monarch in history to celebrate a Diamond Jubilee, the first being Queen Victoria. The UK held massive celebrations, including a Thames River pageant, street parties, and a star-studded concert at Buckingham Palace. The event showcased the Queen's enduring popularity, as millions gathered to honor her lifetime of service. It reaffirmed public support for the monarchy, proving that the institution remained strong despite past controversies. The Queen's steadfast leadership during decades of political, social, and technological change had earned her global respect, making her one of the most admired figures of the 21st century. On July 22, 2013, the royal family welcomed Prince George of Cambridge, the firstborn son of Prince William and Kate Middleton. His birth secured the future of the monarchy, as he became third in line to the throne, following his father and grandfather, Prince Charles. Crowds gathered outside St. Mary's Hospital, where Kate gave birth, just as they had when Princess Diana gave birth to William. The world got its first glimpse of baby George as William and Kate introduced him on the hospital steps, continuing a beloved royal tradition. Prince George's birth marked the beginning of a new generation of royals, ensuring that the House of Windsor would continue for decades to come. While Prince William embraced his royal duties, Prince Harry's journey took a different path. Harry co-founded the Invictus Games in 2014, a sporting event for injured military veterans. He continued Princess Diana's legacy, working with charities focused on AIDS awareness, mental health, and African conservation efforts. Unlike William, Harry struggled with his role within the royal family. He was expected to support the monarchy, but with no clear future as king, he began to question his place. His party lifestyle remained a tabloid favorite, but he was also a deeply emotional figure, openly discussing his struggles with mental health. Prince Harry's growing independence would eventually lead to one of the biggest royal shakeups in modern history: his decision to step back from royal duties. While most of the royal family thrived in the 2010s, Prince Andrew, the Queen's second son, became embroiled in scandal. He was accused of having close ties with Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender. A BBC interview in November 2019 attempted to clear his name, but instead, it worsened public opinion. Under immense pressure, Prince Andrew was forced to step down from royal duties, marking one of the biggest royal disgraces in recent history. The scandal tarnished the monarchy's reputation, proving that even senior royals were not immune to public scrutiny. As the 2010s ended, the British royal family stood at a crossroads. The Queen remained a beloved leader, continuing to serve as a symbol of stability and continuity. Prince William and Kate had established themselves as the future of the monarchy, winning public admiration for their modern approach to royal life. Prince Harry, though still part of the monarchy, was increasingly questioning his role and his relationship with the press. The royal family had survived scandals and crises, but new challenges awaited in the next decade. As we move into the 2020s, the royal family would face the departure of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the global COVID-19 pandemic, and eventually the death of Queen Elizabeth II. The 2020s ushered in one of the most transformative periods in the history of the British royal family. Within just a few years, the monarchy faced unprecedented challenges: the shocking departure of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the COVID-19 pandemic, and, most notably, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, marking the end of her historic reign. This decade saw the monarchy tested in new ways, as it struggled to maintain public support in an era of growing Republican sentiment and increased scrutiny from the media and social movements. Would the British monarchy survive in the modern world? This chapter explores how the House of Windsor navigated these turbulent years. One of the most shocking moments in modern royal history came in January 2020, when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced that they were stepping back from their royal duties. Dubbed Megxit, their decision sent shockwaves through the UK and beyond. The couple cited media harassment, lack of support from the royal family, and their desire for financial independence as key reasons for their departure. They moved to North America, first to Canada and later to California, severing their traditional ties to the monarchy. Their departure deepened divisions within the royal family, particularly between Harry and his brother, Prince William. The once inseparable brothers became estranged, with William remaining loyal to royal tradition, while Harry pursued a new life outside the monarchy. In 2021, Harry and Meghan gave a bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey, where they accused the royal family of neglect, racism, and failing to protect them from the press. The interview caused a public relations crisis for the monarchy, further intensifying debates over its relevance in the modern world. As the world grappled with the COVID-19 pandemic, the royal family had to adapt. Queen Elizabeth II, at 94 years old, addressed the nation, reassuring the public that "we will meet again." Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, contracted the virus but recovered, highlighting how even the monarchy was not immune to global crises. The family embraced virtual engagements, with members like Prince William, Kate Middleton, and Princess and using technology to remain visible and supportive during lockdowns. Despite the challenges, the Queen's calm presence during the pandemic reinforced her role as a symbol of stability, much like she had been during past crises. On April 9, 2021, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, passed away at the age of 99. His funeral was a somber event, with COVID-19 restrictions limiting attendance to just 30 people, including the Queen, who was seen sitting alone in mourning. Philip had been the Queen's lifelong partner, serving as her rock of support for over 7 decades. His death marked the beginning of the final chapter of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, as she continued her duties without her closest confidant. Though he was never king, Prince Philip left a lasting legacy, particularly through his environmental advocacy and the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, which inspired young people around the world. Despite her advancing age and declining health, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated 70 years on the throne in 2022, a milestone no other British monarch had achieved. The UK held 4 days of celebrations, including a Trooping the Colour parade, a grand concert at Buckingham Palace, and a street party across the nation. The Queen made a surprise appearance with Paddington Bear in a pre-recorded skit, showing her playful side and winning the hearts of millions. However, her limited public appearances during the event hinted at her failing health, as she relied more on Prince Charles, Prince William, and Camilla to represent the monarchy. The Platinum Jubilee was a chance for the UK and the world to honor the Queen's unwavering service, but it also signaled that her reign was nearing its end. On September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II passed away at the age of 96, marking the end of the Second Elizabethan era. Her death sent shockwaves across the world, as she had been a constant presence in global affairs for over 70 years. The UK entered a period of mourning, with thousands gathering at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle to pay their respects. Her state funeral, held at Westminster Abbey, was one of the largest gatherings of world leaders in history. With her passing, the crown was immediately passed to her eldest son, who became King Charles III. The question now was, could Charles maintain the monarchy's relevance in the 21st century? With the accession of King Charles III, the British monarchy faced a new chapter filled with uncertainties. Unlike his mother, Charles had spent most of his life preparing for the throne, making him the oldest person in history to become king. He took a more outspoken approach on issues like climate change, but critics questioned whether he could unite the nation in the same way his mother had. His coronation in 2023 was a scaled-down affair, reflecting modern financial concerns and a desire for a more streamlined monarchy. While Charles inherited the duty and legacy of his mother, public attitudes toward the monarchy were shifting, with growing calls for a Republican Britain. The future of the royal family rested on how well they could adapt to a rapidly changing world. As the decade progressed, the royal family continued to be at the center of controversy, tradition, and change. Prince William and Kate Middleton strengthened their public roles, positioning themselves as the future of the monarchy. Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, 2023, and Netflix documentary series deepened tensions between him and the rest of the family, further dividing public opinion. The Commonwealth's loyalty wavered, with some nations considering removing the British monarch as head of state. Calls for a more transparent and accountable monarchy grew louder, with debates over royal spending and the institution's colonial past. By 2025, the British royal family was still standing, but it was a monarchy in transition, one that had to work harder than ever to justify its existence in the modern world. The British monarchy has survived wars, scandals, and societal changes, but the challenges of the 21st century are unlike anything it has faced before. With King Charles III's reign underway and Prince William preparing for his future as king, the monarchy's survival depends on how well it adapts. As public opinion shifts, the question remains, will the monarchy continue to thrive, or is its time running out? One thing is certain, the British royal family has endured for over 1,000 years, and its story is far from over. For over 1,000 years, the British monarchy has endured wars, revolutions, scandals, and sweeping societal changes. Yet, it has remained one of the most recognizable and influential institutions in the world. From the Norman Conquest to the reign of Queen Elizabeth II, the monarchy has constantly evolved to maintain its relevance. But now, in 2025, it faces some of the most pressing challenges in its long history. As we conclude this journey through the entire history of the British royal family, one question remains: what does the future hold for the monarchy? By 2025, King Charles III had been on the throne for nearly 3 years. While he had worked to establish himself as a modern monarch, his reign had not been without difficulties. Public approval remained uncertain, as younger generations questioned whether the monarchy was still necessary in a modern democratic Britain. The Commonwealth continued to fracture, with several nations, including Jamaica and Australia, actively debating whether to remove the British monarch as their head of state. Prince William and Kate Middleton became even more central figures in the royal family's future, taking on more public duties as they prepared for William's eventual kingship. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle remained estranged from the royal family, with their media projects continuing to stir controversy. Financial transparency became a key issue, as critics questioned the amount of taxpayer money spent on maintaining the royal institution. Meanwhile, King Charles's health and long-term reign remained a subject of speculation. At 76 years old, he was already an older monarch, and many wondered whether his rule would be short-lived, paving the way for Prince William to take the throne sooner than expected. In 2025, the royal family worked hard to modernize its image while maintaining its core traditions. Digital engagement became a priority, with younger royals using social media platforms to connect with the public more directly. Efforts were made to confront Britain's colonial past, with King Charles and Prince William making public statements acknowledging historical injustices. The family focused on charitable initiatives, particularly those related to climate change, mental health, and global inequality. The debate over abolishing the monarchy continued to grow in the UK, especially among younger voters who saw the institution as outdated. Despite these efforts, the monarchy remained a polarizing topic, with critics demanding reforms or even abolition, while supporters saw it as a vital part of Britain's heritage and identity. As we look beyond 2025, the British royal family stands at a crossroads. It has survived countless challenges throughout history, but the coming decades may prove to be its biggest test yet. If King Charles III can stabilize his reign, the monarchy may continue for another generation, with Prince William eventually stepping into a well-prepared role as king. If public support continues to decline, the UK may reconsider its constitutional monarchy, leading to dramatic reforms or even the end of the institution altogether. The role of the monarchy in the Commonwealth will continue to shrink, with more nations opting for full independence. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis represent the future of the House of Windsor, but their roles in a changing world remain uncertain. One thing is clear: the monarchy is no longer invincible. Its survival depends on how well it can adapt to the rapidly evolving world while holding onto the traditions that have defined it for centuries. The British monarchy has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the birth of modern democracy, and the changing tides of history. From the legendary rule of William the Conqueror to the modern complexities of King Charles III, the royal family has been both a symbol of stability and a source of controversy. Whether the monarchy continues to thrive or fades into history, its legacy is undeniable. It has shaped Britain and the world in ways few institutions ever could. As we stand in 2025, the monarchy's future is uncertain, but its past will always remain a fascinating and integral part of human history.